There are tons of terms in politics that float around and are confusing. For some, it's the method used to achieve an economic end, while for others, it's an end itself. Let's look at them divided by end goal. Each end goal is the utopian version of each group, and may not be believed to be entirely achievable. Perfect capitalism. Capitalism is a system that almost always utilizes the free market, that allows people with money to invest in the means of production of a company and get a higher return back than they put in. Unfortunately, in many cases, these companies become monopolies and can ask for any price they want, and people will pay for it or suffer, or become monopolies, or sole buyers of labor, and pay however little they want for it. When these two conditions occur, they can get away with dumping externalities like pollution on the surrounding inhabitants, or essentially own their employees or even government, such as with company stores in the Gilded Age, with little to no backlash without serious intervention from a government. Here are some methods to achieve perfect capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism. The anarcho-capitalist believes that if government just stopped existing, corporations could provide every government service we need, and then we would all make enough and everyone would have equal access to freedoms, protections, and no more wars. It's the fact that the government meddles and therefore businesses want to control the government that creates all the problems. If people believed that a military corporation was going to war unjustly, they could just boycott it. Taxation is theft, so if you want a service, you would have to pay for it, including private police, protection, courts, fire departments, and roads. But since there was no government taxing us, we would magically all have more money, even though without economies of scale, only a government could provide, so many of these services that can't get much more efficient, or are emergency-based, would be way more expensive, and as capitalism requires failure to thrive, and bankruptcy laws are backed up only by government, capitalism would collapse into poverty as more and more people got kicked out of the system or worked slave wages for reasons mentioned at the top. Right-wing libertarianism, or the Austrian school. Libertarianism was actually a leftist ideology as a counter to authoritarianism. In America, the name was hijacked by people like the John Birch Society that were against unions and the New Deal. They believed that the past was much better and less government intervention is what we need, and we need to go back to the old ways, and anytime you mention a government activity in the past, they will use it as an argument that government shouldn't be involved beyond essentially our military defense. They vary from intensity as to what they think the government should do, but they certainly should never interfere with business other than act as courts, which, if you know anything about courts, can be used to bully and intimidate the poor, so the rich or status quo always have the upper hand. Also, they are often completely oblivious that for the first 100 years of the United States, when governments didn't interfere with business, corporations were also illegal, and only individuals or partnerships were businesses. This allowed employer and employee to be on nearly equal terms. Being anti-corporation because of the East India Company essentially owned Parliament was the other reason for the Boston Tea Party no one ever talks about. It was the negative, ruthless impacts of the rise of corporations that forced the government to get involved, especially as the corporations created such a wealth disparity that the wealthy could buy politicians in the first place. Conservativism. Conservativism is a lot like right libertarianism, but with more authoritarianism. They lean more on the side of companies than workers, if they're not entirely hostile to labor unions. They mostly claim that problems of capitalism are a failure of morality of the people and the poor for being lazy, and wish to make the nation spend less on welfare, which they say makes poor people even more lazy, even though there are no jobs in the area and no means to get a job if they did. Punishment is their main reaction to anything they view as negative, so we in the US have the highest prison population, some of the highest opioid addiction rates, and some of the worst income inequality in the world. They also tend to be more jingoistic and nationalistic, all claiming to be patriotic. Less government, less regulations, less taxes on the rich, more enforcement of morality will lead to a more perfect capitalism where everyone succeeds, even if there's zero evidence of that. Trickle-down economics. This is an idea pushed forward by Reagan based on the Laffer Curve. The Laffer Curve was made by supply-side economist Arthur Laffer to show his theory that if you tax companies and the rich too much, the economy actually slows and brings in less taxes. This is true in some cases, but the amount is unknown, and Reagan himself got it wrong and had to raise taxes again, but not as high a level. The modern GOP claims that if a little does good, a lot does better, and treats tax cuts as a perfect solution for everything, merging the Laffer Curve with Libertarianism, where slashing government spending at all costs will make everything in the free market always better. While this idea has some merit, if you're trying to raise government income by loosening up commerce, you can play around with raising and lowering taxes to find the sweet spot. But if you're just looking to slash taxes overall, it will end up seriously hurting the economy in the long run, as both mental and physical infrastructure with super low overhead begins to collapse from lack of maintenance and upgrading. Bill Clinton raised the taxes for companies by 3%, and workers saw a big boost in pay, as if these companies invested back in their workers, they didn't see a tax hike and got better talent. But if they instead made it a profit, they would have to pay the government. Since then, so many loopholes have killed these advantages, it doesn't really help the average worker. Neoliberalism. Neoliberals are not to be confused with politically liberal philosophy. Economic liberalism was a term used for laissez-faire capitalism, and are essentially conservatives with less focus on moral failures and more focus on globalization and free trade, even if they provide no safety net for the restructuring of labor post-globalization. Keynesianism. This system was invented by John Maynard Keynes, which used government spending and repayment to inversely reflect the economy. During a recession or depression, the government should spend like crazy on infrastructure and any job to get people back to work. The major advantage of this is that labor and materials are super cheap and in low demand during a recession. The government spending will prevent wasting human labor and talent and get money flowing to prime the pump for a recovery. Once recovered, the government must draconianly pay down the debt in a timely manner to get ready for the next market downturn. Sadly, there is no law to enforce this, so we had a terrible recession under Obama because we slashed government spending to the bone, but failed to pay off the debt under George W. when we were having a surplus because we had to spend so much on war and war profiteering on the country's credit card. Now that the country is in an upswing, Trump's tax cuts and spending isn't really expected to help the nation much because labor and materials are rising to peak costs, and will produce a lot of national debt bonds to stash money that would have otherwise been taken up by the free market banks. In the end, the economy probably won't end up feeling any different, but there will be $1 trillion added to the debt. Guaranteed basic income. This is a weird one because it doesn't fit neatly into any of the slots on the map. It's a relatively bipartisan, as liberals, socialists, conservatives, and libertarians like it. With a rising automation and less jobs available, it seeks to fix the problem Marx designed communism for, to be a workaround. All the data so far on it has been positive, though larger and larger population studies need to occur. As money is injected into the market, more demand rises, increasing productivity and profits from business that can be taxed. Everyone gets the same amount, so no one complains about other people getting free handouts. Basic costs of living to prevent starvation or homelessness will prevent a lot of medical and police spending, and allow people the freedom to try starting their own businesses. This would eliminate the need for minimum wage, as people will work crappy jobs just to make their lives better and not to survive. All the expensive means testing needed to determine if you deserve welfare will go away, and people will be much healthier and happier and now driven to go to work to move themselves up instead of just circling the drain and going nowhere. Bill Gates has said it should be paid by an automation tax, so it can slow down replacing workers with automation until the payoff is so high that it's worth the tax, and that slowdown will allow workers to retool and retrain and reap the benefits of automation, a technology we paid for through government research. An energy tax and credit to all may actually give the people the chance to buy the energy they like in the free market, putting solar and wind on the same foot as currently subsidized coal and other fossil fuels. This system needs testing and research to start out slow, but as technology keeps stealing jobs more and more, we are going to have to look at this as an option if we decide we want to continue to live in a capitalist system. Social democracy. This is a branch of socialism that aims to fix all the flaws of capitalism by providing for a social safety net in case of monopolies, monopsonies, and externalities through taxation and regulation and large government programs that will actually save the taxpayers more than they paid in or could ever buy from the free market due to ridiculously low overhead, no profit margins, and economies of scale. This, along with several of the other methods mentioned above, use what is called a mixed economy, which is a mixture of planned economy and free market. This so far has been the most successful version of socialism the world has ever seen, Northern Europe being its most successful form.